You are listening to the Done with Dieting podcast, episode number 2. Hi there. So I am so excited to introduce you to the Done with Dieting podcast. And it's so interesting because I just got off a call with a client and she's been on a diet since she was 9 years old. She's been on almost everything that we could do to possibly control our weight. She's done pills, she's done acupuncture, she's done Weight Watchers, she's currently restricting her food, she's done aerobics, she's done it all. And it really makes me realize how we have just completely forgotten how to eat as a society. It's kind of crazy, don't you think? One of my clients said not too long ago, Elizabeth, I have forgotten how to nutrition. I don't know how to nutrition anymore. And we laughed about it, but I think it's something that so many of us struggle with. At least I know that I did, because we have all of these food rules that are coming at us. And not only from diets, like we get it from other people. I know that whenever I go out to dinner, people comment on my food. They say, oh, I'm surprised that you would order that. Or you didn't eat all of that, did you? Like if I post a picture of cheesecake on my Instagram. And so we have all of these food rules in our head of what we're supposed to eat, what we can't eat, what's good to eat, what's bad to eat. And, if you've ever read one of those, Men's Health or Women's Health magazine lists of top 10 things that you should have in your diet, you'll totally relate to this because it feels so completely overwhelming. It's like one of those science fiction movies, right? Where if you were to look into my head when I'm sitting down to dinner, I'm like, oh, I can have this and I can't have that. And you see all of the moving parts and the equations, going past you. And that's what it's like to eat these days, right? Like it's become so freaking confusing. And so, this call with my client who started dieting at just 9 years old. It's so not uncommon. And it's something that all of us, many of us have dealt with. And, there's so many diets out there and every diet is saying that it's the fountain of youth, right? That it's the answer that we need in order to be successful finally in this weight loss quest, right? And when we look back at all of those diets, we realize that we weren't fat. Like, look back at a picture of you from 10 years ago and think about what you were doing at that point. Look at it and realize that you were beautiful at that point, right? It's kind of crazy. But yet we still do it to ourselves today. We're like, oh, well, I'm totally different today, right? That today I really am overweight. And today I really do need to lose weight. And maybe you don't. Maybe you do. I don't know. And so, I want to put a caveat. When we talk about dieting, we have two different definitions of diets, right? So I like to think about it as diets with a big D and diets with a small d. Okay. So diets with a small d, we can use this definition as the way that I naturally eat. So just the foods that naturally make up my diet. But we can also think about diets with a small d that are just, kind of healthy eating plans. Like, for example, the DASH diet or having a plant-based diet or being on the Mediterranean diet. These are all just different ways of eating. So when we think about diet with a small d, and this is probably going to be a theme throughout the podcast when I talk about diets with a small d versus diets with a big D, diets with a small d are just describing the way that we eat, okay? Now, where the problem comes in is diets with a big D. And generally, diets with a big D are diets that have been prescribed outside of us. Someone who has written a book or who is an online guru who is saying that these are the foods that you need to eat and you need to stay away from those foods, okay? A diet with a big D is designed to quickly and easily lose weight. Maybe not easily. But diets with a big D don't necessarily work long term. They will get you to your goal, but they aren't designed to be sustainable. So when we're talking about diets, okay, just be clear that we're talking about two different definitions. Diets can be a way of eating, and these are the foods that make up my diet, and this is the way that I choose to eat because it works for my body. And then there's diets with a big D, which are prescribed outside of us, that someone else is dictating and telling us how we should or should not eat. Now, as I mentioned, diets don't work for long-term weight loss. Yes, you can lose weight, but studies show that after about 5 years, that 95% of people who lose weight will regain it again. Why does that happen? And I think one of the main reasons why that happens is because when we follow a diet from someone else, we haven't really integrated or figured out how to eat for our body. And so when we get direction from someone else, we don't really know how to pivot when something outside of the norm happens. So for example, let's say that you want to go out to dinner with your friends and you show up to the restaurant. You've looked at the menu and you've already decided what it is that you want to eat. And you show up to the restaurant and the restaurant is closed, let's say, for example. Now, the food that you had picked out, that was on par with your diet. But now what happens is you've lost the plan. And so what do? And what most of us will do in that case is our brain will come up with this idea of, oh, well, we can't eat what we plan to eat, so I guess we're just going to dive headfirst into a bowl of guacamole, right? I mean, that happens to us all the time. And so what happens is when we follow diets that are prescribed by someone else and we haven't figured out what foods our body does well on and how to eat for our own self, that we can't pivot and we can't figure out how to make it work for us. And so what happens then is when our plan doesn't go as scheduled, we make it mean something. And we make it mean that we are failures. So instead of, having pizza, enjoying it, and having a great time and moving on, all of a sudden, our brain has all of this drama about, oh, we ate pizza last night. Now I'm a total failure. And now that I've had pizza, well, I may as well just go ahead and eat a pint of ice cream too, right? And then our brain goes into this other area of, well, now you really screwed up. There's no way that we can be perfect now. You may as well just, eat everything that's in the fridge. Oh, it's lovely, right? Okay, so number 2, fad diets can actually be really harmful because they can lack essential nutrients that we need. And here's the thing, is that every one of our bodies is totally different in terms of what it needs in terms of macronutrients or nutrients in general. So you may have a diet. So here's a really good example of that. You probably know people who have done really well on like vegetarian eating, okay? You probably also know people who've done really well on keto eating, which is the total opposite. So vegetarian is lots of vegetables, carbs, and there's a fair amount of protein, but it's not animal-based protein. And then we have keto, which is large amounts of fats, higher in protein, Vegetables for sure, but very low carb and starch content. And so these two diets are totally different. If you've ever had someone who's done really well on the vegetarian type diet and you've tried that, it's possible that it just did not work for you. Now, that's not your fault. That's just your body needing different nutrients than that. And it's totally normal. Same thing for keto. There are lots of people who do really well on that, but there are lots of people who really don't. Put someone who does really well on a vegetarian type diet on keto, it will not work, and vice versa. So our bodies have different nutrient needs, and so therefore there can't possibly be a one-size-fits-all diet that all of us will do really well on. Fad diets can be harmful in the way that if you're on a diet that is not right for your body type, you're not going to succeed, and you're probably going to feel really, really bad while you're on it. Now, number 3 reason why dieting does not work long term is overly restrictive diets can take all of the pleasure out of eating. So I have a story about this that I remember years and years ago. Gary, my husband, and I were visiting some friends out in San Francisco, and we went to this bar, and it was just, it was a fun, like, dancing type bar, and the bar was actually having a birthday celebration for itself. And so there was this huge sheet cake, and I remember eyeing it when I first walked in and thinking to myself, I really want some of that cake, even though we had gone out to dinner and I probably wasn't hungry at the time. But I remember that because I was obsessed about this cake, that I just kept thinking about it. And I was enjoying this evening with my friends, and yet I wasn't able to concentrate on the conversation that we were having. I was just completely obsessed with my thoughts about the cake. And after a certain point, I decided that enough time had passed that I could nonchalantly go to the bathroom and pick up a piece of cake on the way home, on the way back to the table. And the cake was gone. And I just remember thinking about how I lost out on that dining experience, or that experience with my friends and my husband, because I was totally obsessed about the cake. And so by dieting, we get these thoughts in our heads that have a really disconnected relationship with food and those around us. So it can really get in the way of having pleasure in our lives. Okay, so number 4 is dieting, along with the frequent and compulsive weighing that accompanies going on diets, can lead to eating disorders. And this is something that I totally identify with, because years ago, before I even started in fitness and health, I actually did a bodybuilding competition, and that diet was actually very, very restrictive. And so in the process, what happened is I developed an unhealthy relationship with food. And I remember being in my kitchen one night after I was done with the competition, and I was eating out of this huge, coffee can sized tin of peanuts. And I remember just putting one peanut into my mouth and eating it after another. And the thoughts in my head were, I need to stop and put this can away. But I couldn't stop. I just kept eating and eating and eating, and I just could not stop myself. It was at that point that I realized that I really needed to change my relationship with food. And this is not uncommon, that each of us, when we go on diets, we have these ideas of what good foods are and what bad foods are. And there are a whole host of eating disorders, one specifically called orthorexia, where we are obsessed with eating the healthiest thing. And so when we deem food as good and bad, what happens is we think that we are good or bad when we want, or when we do eat that food that we've decided is bad for us. So dieting can really F up our relationship with food. And when you really think about it, food is just food. Like, imagine eating a bowl of ice cream or a cone of ice cream or however how much, and just thinking that was delicious, and not having any mind drama about what a terrible person you are for eating freaking ice cream, because you're not a terrible person. Like, think about, a child. A child eats ice cream and really, really enjoys it. We have that opportunity as well. And what's really funny about that is that when I talk to my clients about this concept, they think, well, that's not possible, Elizabeth. If, ice cream is just food and I don't have any mind drama on it, then I'm going to want to eat it all the time. And I'll tell you that that's absolutely not true, because once we realize and really get in touch with how food makes us feel and what foods are good for us and what foods energize us and which foods drain us, then what happens is when we have a good relationship with food and our bodies, we will naturally eat foods that are good for us because we want to nourish our bodies with proper energy. And we realize that when we eat too much ice cream, it makes us feel bad. So it's really kind of interesting to understand how food makes us feel. And when we get out of someone else dictating what food we should be eating and really get into how, an internal way of how food makes us feel, then we've really gotten off of the diet roller coaster. Okay. Now, last is a lot of times we can see people who okay, number 5. So a lot of people out there are selling magic weight loss potions. Okay. Now, when I was doing my bodybuilding, when I was preparing for my bodybuilding show, I think I spent a small fortune on diet pills and fat burners and carb burners, and all it did was make my wallet lighter. Gosh, I think about how much money I spent on those things, and it really kills me today because it really didn't do anything for me. Okay? And if we get addicted to those things, we can really, cause ourselves some harm and some fatal health consequences at worst. So, just be aware that there really is no magic pill. And this is the thing that I really had a kind of come to Jesus moment with myself about, is that there really wasn't any magic pill out there. And I tried and I tried. Trust me, if there was a magic pill, I would have found it. And what I really needed to do was figure out how to work with my body. Now, that being said, there are lots of reasons why someone can be overweight or obese that really has nothing to do with, dieting. Sometimes we overeat because we're trying to self-soothe. Okay. So if that's the case, then we totally are within the power to figure out what we're feeling emotionally and deal with it. Now, I know that I will have many other episodes on how to get out of emotional eating, because it's something that I struggled with for years and years and years. And I know that many of you also. Now, that being said, there are reasons why we can be overweight. We can be overweight for lots of different reasons. Sometimes it's because we're using food as a form of self-soothing or emotional escape. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to get in more touch with your emotions and not use food as a way of distracting yourself from your emotions, I know that I'm going to have more episodes on that for sure. But sometimes we can be overweight because of childhood trauma. And so just be aware that the body can hold childhood trauma, and the way that we cope with that can also be, a way of packing on pounds. So, yeah, and that's something that for sure we need to deal with either through therapy or some other form. Other times we can be overweight because of how we were taught to eat by others who also had biases of being overweight or biases against certain foods or, unhealthy eating habits. But third, we could also be overweight because of hormonal issues or due to medication impact. So be aware that sometimes dieting is not the end-all be-all answer. And sometimes we just need to get back in touch with our body and be okay with it. Okay. So yo-yo diets can really mess with our heads. And especially since society rewards thinness, when we're losing weight, we get tons and tons of praise from well-meaning people to, keep up the good work. But what we'll definitely talk about in future episodes is how that can also be harmful. Okay. So now, what's the fix? Well, we know that what we need to do to become healthier. So what's the fix? We all know what we need to do to become healthier. It's really not rocket science, right? We know that we need to drink water. We know that we need to eat vegetables. We know that we need to limit treats. We need to eat protein. We need to, move. We need to manage our stress. We need to get, enough sleep. Okay, so we know all of that stuff. The question is, why aren't we doing it? Okay, and so once we become aware of the core beliefs that we have, then we can change it. So I have a couple of questions for you, and I'm going to invite you to write these down. And I just want you to, be aware of maybe some biases that you have. And are these biases serving you? So once we have awareness around our beliefs and what we're thinking, then we can choose, do we really want to keep thinking this? So the first one is about foods. Do you have any food biases? So have you labeled food good or bad? If foods weren't good or bad, would you even know how to eat? And this goes back to, my client who was like, I don't even know how to nutrition anymore. Like, how often do we get so stuck in our heads with all of these different rules that we have no idea what we're even supposed to be eating anymore? It's just astounding that we can't do this. It just seems like something so simple should be easy, right? And then notice if there are any foods that you've labeled that you quote unquote can't have. Okay. And then why? So why can't you have these foods? What is it about them that makes them off limits? And be aware that if it's an allergy or if it's something like an intolerance, totally fine, right? Like, that's just how we were built. But if it's something that you really have no, negative consequence of, why can't you eat that? Why is it off limits? Okay. Now, number 2, the beliefs that things would be different if you were a smaller size. So, do you believe that you would be different if you were a smaller size? And if you do believe, okay. Now, do you believe that things would be different in your life if you were a smaller size? Okay. So now be aware that I fully understand that for us folks over the age of 45, that we do have some aches and pains that go along with having excess weight. So outside of that, though, do you believe that your life would be drastically different if you were a smaller size? Okay. Do you have a closet full of clothes that are different sizes? Some that are from 20 years ago? And what feelings pop up for you if you think about throwing these clothes away, okay, that don't fit? Like, how does that feel? Like, think about that right now. If you were to get rid of all of the clothes out of your closet right now that did not fit you, what would they make you feel? And then this is the craziest thing. So many of us, and I've done this too, is we buy clothes that don't fit in a smaller size, thinking that that will be an inspiration or motivation to lose weight. Like, why do we do that? And then how do you think things will be different when you have lost the weight? Like, what's the emotion that you think you will have? Like, do you think that you'll be more confident? Do you think you'll be happier? And why? Okay. And then third, do you judge yourself for falling off diets? Okay. Do you judge yourself for not being able to stay on a diet? And as a result of that, do you shy away from telling people what you're currently eating and why? Okay. Because there is a lot of shame, I think, for many of us who have been on diet after diet after diet, that we don't want to tell people about what's going on with us right now because we're afraid of the judgment. And other people, let me tell you this, other people aren't judging you. You are judging yourself. Okay. So now that you've written down the answers to all of those questions, what I want to do is I want to ask you, do you want to keep believing those thoughts? Now, your brain is going to want to say yes. And so I'm going to invite you to answer this question. If you were on a deserted island, would you still want to believe these same things about all of these questions that we just asked? It's kind of an interesting question, right? Now, that's all I have for you today, but I would love to continue this conversation if you want to talk about it. I want to invite you to connect with me on social. So if you are on social, you can find me on Facebook at Total Health by Elizabeth. That's facebook.com/Total Health by Eliz. Or you can find me on Instagram at Elizabeth Sherman 68. Or if you're not on social and you want to connect with me through email, you can go to my website, which is elizabethsherman.com, and you can contact me there. So I will see you next week. I hope you have a good time. So I will see you next week. So talk to you next time. See you next week.